Tonight on State Affair, we'll be on the move in old aircraft and new cars. But first, Port Misery. It's regained its notoriety, this time because of plans to bulldoze the area which was the landing site for many of our state's pioneers. Then it was infamous for its twisted mangroves and accompanying smells. Well, now the remnants of those mangroves could be history, well and truly. The Port Adelaide Council and the state government wants to provide a $50 million housing development, marina and parkland. Conservationists say the area should be preserved because of its heritage value. But the joint government committee behind the plan argues the project will help put the port back on the map again. Kay Matthewson reports.
We feel that this area of mangroves is a very important remnant of what greeted the early settlers when they arrived in South Australia.
The government is not in a position to be saving a small area of mangroves at this stage.
And this is what the fight's all about. A small group of mangroves, which the Conservation Council says is important to the state's history. When many of the state's first settlers set foot in South Australia, they did so after wading through the swamp and mangroves that was once called Port Misery. In recent years, the area has turned into a 16-hectare rubbish dump for everything from old carpet, rubble and bitumen, and even spare engine parts. So when plans for the multi-million-dollar scheme were revealed last year, it's easy to see why many port residents were in favour of the development. But the Conservation Council says the project, known as the Old Port Reach, which includes housing, a marina and a park, would destroy an integral part of the state's history.
We really need to cherish sites like this. It's a very important historic site. It used to be called Port Misery, and to build anything there and do anything with it would be a bit like the Americans building housing on Plymouth Rock, where the Pilgrim Fathers first landed from the Mayflower in America.
The Port Adelaide Council bought 10 hectares of the land for $1.3 million. The other 6 hectares is owned by the state government. Together, the two government authorities decided on the type of development they preferred, although no guidelines have been established. The size and nature of the project will depend on the developer who presents the best planning ideas to the committee. But what of the mangroves?
I guess the argument is because they are a small area of mangroves, and I think you've seen yourself, they're pretty small, whether or not, because they're small and because they're the last, does that necessarily mean that they should be preserved? Now, we are not in a position to be saying that they should be at this stage.
The National Trust has recorded the land and what remains of the mangroves on its register, but it hasn't classified the area, which means little can be done to prevent the trees being pulled out to make way for the development. While conservationists are against the plan, they would like to see the entire 16-hectare property turned into parklands.
Every now and then there's a spot where we have to decide that an area is of sufficient historic importance not to get greedy and build boating marinas or housing complexes or whatever. Our subsequent descendants would be aghast if they knew we took this decision to develop an area of such historic significance.
Well, perhaps there is a middle way where we can preserve some of that vital part of our history and still clean up some of the mess. We understand a developer will be appointed by the committee within the next 6 months, and work at Port Misery is expected to begin within the next year. Well, after the break, opposition to the Joe campaign hits the streets. Graffiti on Joe, next on State Affair. So far in the sometimes farcical Joe for PM campaign, most of us south of the tropics have simply been bemused bystanders. I've only seen one Joe for PM sticker on a car since we all got one in the mail. But not everyone's taking his onslaught lying down. In Sydney's suburbia, there's emerged a sometimes covert force determined to keep Joe north of the Queensland border. They call themselves the White Chalk Brigade, and under the cover of darkness, they're spreading the word. They're dedicated, they're determined.
I've always had this feeling of him as being an insidious, clumsy, crude sort of fellow who didn't follow the rules.
I don't compromise. I've set my policy up and I don't compromise.
Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen. He might be flavour of the month everywhere else, but the thought of him becoming Prime Minister simply chills the spines of these women.
I mean, first of all, I thought it was funny. And then when I heard 60 million had been put aside for his campaign, I started to get worried.
Until Joe went on the hustings, these ladies were leading contented lives. Their children grown up, they were back in the workforce with enough time to enjoy a midweek morning tea.
But it's called white work.
Beautiful.
And the bit that I get all excited about is the hem stitch. This little tiny piece here.
Oh, Penny will go blind doing this.
It all looks very middle class, and it is, except this is a gathering of the White Chalk Brigade.
The White Chalk Brigade is the opposite to the White Shoe Brigade because we aren't wealthy people. We're actually asking for small donations to buy the chalk or for legal representation if needed, or...
At the end of a hard day's work, instead of going home to make dinner for the kids, they make a detour.
Riding on a footpath is said to be not a legal activity, and so we feel a bit worried about it, but we're willing to take that risk to get our message around.
Are you a radical, do you think?
No, I'm not a radical.
How would you describe yourself and your group then?
I think we're just middle-class, middle-aged housewives, and we have children and we're concerned for their future.
My kids think it's marvellous. They think I've joined the graffiti artists. They're very proud of me.
One of my children is doing social work and he's a bit of a radical and he thinks it's great. He's always saying, you're just a bourgeois middle-class woman, Mum, you know, critical. And I feel, you know, I've gained some sort of seal of approval from him. We did ask a lawyer what our position was, and he said, yes, it's you could be said to be defacing public property. He said he would defend us, and I said, what would we plead? And he said, well, you could plead insanity or you could throw yourself at the mercy of the court. So I think we'll be looking for a woman lawyer.
The White Chalk Brigade don't hit any pavement indiscriminately. They aim for maximum impact. The Sydney headquarters of the National Party is a favourite. So too, Dalgetty's.
I like to chalk on banks, actually, because I think that they illustrate the fact that people are going to have far less money in banks if Bjelke-Petersen gets into power in this country at a national level.
I think just ordinary people, middle-of-the-road people like myself, realising that they have to do something, speak up and say, this is what's happening, let's think about it and consider it. Don't let it just happen and regret it later.
It'll be quite funny if it wasn't so serious. Coming up next, our motoring segment. This week, Graham Ryan looks at the new Mazda 121. Now to our motoring report. You'll recall last week in the first of this series, Graham Ryan took the new Jaguar through its paces, a car that the manufacturer says will turn the top end of the luxury car market upside down. Well, tonight Graham looks at a car that most of us could contemplate, the new Mazda 121, dubbed already as the fun machine. It's the latest from the big Japanese manufacturer, and it says this vehicle will turn the small car market upside down. Graham looks at the new 121 and compares it with Mazda's top-of-the-range model.
Today we're in style again in the Mazda 929, which is a flagship of the Mazda fleet, priced at under $30,000. The 929 gives plenty in the way of luxury with a very lavish interior, very much up in electronics with electronic fuel injection, management system of the engine, and we do have controls such as power windows, central locking system and all those features to go with the car itself. Pop-up headlights on the vehicle, and the low roof line, in fact it's about 50 millimetres lower overall than the standard sedan. MXs come only in white and overall a very smart motor car. From style to fun, Mazda are now entering a new area of the market with a 1.3 litre fun-top Super Deluxe 121. The front-wheel drive vehicle will compete against Barina, Charade, Corolla and Pulsar. In the 121, there is an enormous amount of interior room. You can rake the rear seat for a reclined position, remove the head restraint and fold the seat forward in a split fold style. One of the outstanding features that is unique to the car is a rear seat slide, increasing the boot and carrying space. One of the outstanding features with Mazda is that they're honing in on the convertible market, where they're a very popular vehicle, particularly here in South Australia with our sunny climate. No good in Melbourne, of course, but it's the best of both worlds because it's more than a sunroof and it opens up more or less the entire roof area. Also with Mazda, the riding qualities are extremely good. Perhaps a little firm in some ways, but this is where we get good riding qualities. Steering's rack and pinion and very precise, a good short gear change action. As far as the engine is concerned, it's a single overhead camshaft, and for those who are not mechanically minded, it's the one shaft driving all valves, belt driven, and that's to reduce noise. Very economical engine with its 1.3 litre power. It will return around 7.4 litres per 100 kilometres for running like we're doing here at the moment. And for those not into the metric aspect of it, that's about 38 miles per gallon. Very economical unit. It is a compact car, and this is where we get the advantages of all the interior room. It does have a bit of a front-wheel drive characteristic, so on heavy acceleration it tends to pull to the straight-ahead position. But this is not only applicable to Mazda, as many other front-wheel drive vehicles have that steering characteristic. In summary, the Mazda Super Deluxe with the sunroof, priced at around $14,500, is fairly expensive. But there again, this is the top of the range. Base models are priced from $11,500. They're aimed basically at the under 25 age group and perhaps more so for the females. A lovely car for the ladies.
I don't know about the ladies, I wouldn't mind one myself, but sadly they don't come as part of the reports. Periodically Graham will pop up on State Affair, by the way, with more about what for most of us is the second biggest investment in our lives. This is State Affair. Next we take to the skies as a tribute to our aerial pioneers. No doubt most of you would know of South Australia's Flying Smith brothers, Ross and Keith, the World War I pilots remembered as the first to fly from England to Australia within 30 days. Well, on Sunday, a major trust fund will be launched to commemorate the famous brothers. A big aircraft display at the Adelaide International Airport will celebrate the occasion. The money comes from the estate of the late Lady Anita Smith, the wife of Sir Keith. Its aim? To advance South Australian aviation science. Stephen Butler has this report, which includes previously unpublished photographs of Sir Keith and Sir Ross Smith.
I guess the most notable feature about it is fairly coarse controls, and it's got the large steering wheel control cabin, very coarse movements. But I say it's like a heavy tiger moth, very noisy in the cabin, and that motor in front belches out an enormous amount of heat.
John Treloar's Waco is just one of about 30 military and civilian aircraft which will line up on the International Terminal tarmac on Sunday.
Most aeroplanes vary somewhat, but there isn't really anyone quite like this.
Sunday's display will be a tribute to the famous South Australian flying aces, Sir Ross and Sir Keith Smith. As you can see, the Waco is not a young aircraft. It was built in 1936 in Ohio, but it's a good deal younger than the Smith brothers' Vickers Vimy, which flew them to international fame in 1919.
In 1919, the Australian government, through the Prime Minister Billy Hughes, offered a prize of £10,000 for the first Australians who could fly from England to Australia in less than 30 days.
The Smith brothers took up the challenge. This photograph from the state's Mortlock Library was taken on the day of their departure from England. The Smiths are in the flying helmets. They flew with two engineers, Shears and Bennett, and made the arduous journey in 28 days, finally touching down at Darwin on December the 10th. This photograph was taken the day they landed on Australian soil.
They won the prize. They were the only crew to really complete the course. They won £10,000. We think that's probably worth close to $500,000 today, and they split that between them.
All 4 crew members received £2,500, and the Smiths were feted around Australia. Even in modern-day Adelaide, monuments to them abound. There's their actual Vickers Vimy at Adelaide Airport, its housing currently under renovation. And at Adelaide Oval, there's this life-size statue of Sir Ross Smith.
After their successful flight, and after they'd been knighted, they set out to plan a round-the-world flight. It was unfortunate that during the testing of the aircraft for that round-the-world flight, Ross Smith and also James Bennett were actually killed. Keith Smith always wanted to perpetuate the memory of Ross Smith, who was killed much earlier in life, and on his death, Lady Smith took up that challenge and set out to establish a fund that will commemorate both brothers.
Sunday's static aircraft display will launch that fund, to be known as the Sir Ross and Sir Keith Smith Fund.
That will be used to advance the science and education of aeronautics in South Australia at the bequest of Lady Anita Smith.
It's expected the fund of some millions of dollars will earn $300,000 to $400,000 a year to help South Australian aviators. The air show at Adelaide Airport will include model aircraft featuring a scale version of the Smiths Vickers.
It is a 1/7 scale model, 3 metres in wingspan, weighing about 10 kilograms, and it flies beautifully, just like the original.
Surveys show only about 5% of Australians regularly use air travel. So from the aged to the modern, a new Qantas 767 will likely be a popular feature for those wanting to walk through it on Sunday. It's a long flight from the Vickers and the Waco. How long can yours go on, do you think?
Oh, depends. I guess it mainly depends on the enthusiasm of the owner and the depth of the pocket.
You can see it on Sunday. The trust fund, incidentally, will be administered by Elders trustees, so it's in safe hands. And there's a nice display of Smith memorabilia in the Mortlock Library if you'd like to see more. And by the way, I didn't know this till I was looking at that display today, but the first ever Melbourne to Adelaide flight was made by Ross Smith. He did it in 1920 in the same Vickers Vimy. Took him 7.5 hours. Well, Les Worthington of Modbury is a very busy man these days. Les is a mechanic and his garage is always full with cars that need repairing. Engine faults, a little bit of panel beating, gearbox problems. Actually, transmissions are Les's specialty. And it'd be fairly safe to say that as exclusive mechanics go, Les Worthington is the busiest in Adelaide.
Hello. Hello, Les. It's John, mate. I'm having a few problems with the gearbox in the Audi.
Oh, what's the symptoms?
Crunching, the gearbox tends to be slipping a bit too.
Yeah, it doesn't sound too good.
No, look, could you put me in today sometime?
We're pretty flat out at the moment. What I could do is if you could possibly drop it in after midday.
OK, then I'll do that. Thanks very much, Les.
Bye-bye.
Here's the Audi. Thanks very much, Les.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Catch you later.
I'll see you later.
I know you thought he worked on the real ones. Well, to Les, these are the real ones. His garage for radio-controlled model cars is going great cogs.
Well, over the past 12 to 18 months, it's become so popular. You know, there's just quite a few cars out there. People sort of haven't got the techniques or know enough about these cars to get them sort of either assembled or repaired. Problems are gearboxes, transmissions, motors. With any sort of adjustments or any sort of work that needs to be done in these cars, we sort of do it.
Like out on the road, are there good drivers and bad drivers with this sport?
Yeah, definitely. Seeing kids the way they've driven their cars around, there are good and bad drivers.
Whatever the problem, it ends up with Les, a man with a lot of patience.
Well, basically, it's like a mini service station, basically, where you do all your mechanical repairs and all your services on the cars. The main problems are gearboxes, transmissions. Some gearboxes are fairly simple to put together. Some are more difficult, more involved, depending on what you've got limited slip diffs on some gearboxes and others you're just straight gearboxes, that sort of thing. But the complexity of it does vary from one car to another. When I first got into it 7 years ago, there was only sort of one basic car and that was it. But now you've got rear-wheel drives, which is your standard type of car. You've got front-wheel drives, four-wheel drives, four-wheel drives with four-wheel steering, and you know, it just gets more and more complicated.
There's clubs sprouting up all over Australia, and the sport is flourishing, which means Les won't be short of work.
Well, the Paul Macon prang in the making. Tomorrow night on State Affair, the high cost of surgery.
If it had been some other kind of operation, fair enough, but not just for a splinter.
$400 to remove a splinter. Are the medicos going over the top? We'll find out tomorrow night on State Affair, so I'll see you then. Good night.